Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now.
Set the stage. Violet's a geek. And she, of course, has authored 20-some-odd books, specifically on sexuality. She's going to be talking about a subject matter that may make some of you uncomfortable if we're going to have the sex talk. Basically, no, not like that. I've yet to have the sex talk, by the way. I think it's obvious. So, Mom she looked up confusingly. We read the book. What are you talking about? It was this little book. I still have the books at home, by the way. It's a very, I'm not going to go, okay, so we're talking about sex, right? I did not understand masturbation. So this book had little illustrations, but it was like a benign, I was like, it was a comic. I'm like, it was scary. I was like, I didn't know what the hell it was. So anyway, now if that made you uncomfortable, you should definitely leave the room. So now I don't think Violet's going to say anything worse than that. So I'm going to take all the heat for that. So she's certainly going to be talking to human sexuality in relation to social media, which is important, and specifically on how social media is evolving. And we're on a path to big trouble. Violet has a lot of perspective, certainly a lot of gravitas, and I was thrilled that she accepted the invitation to come to Gnomedex. Please, as soon as we get the slide popped up here, unless Violet wants to begin before the slide. This is not going to be up during your talk. Don't worry, it won't be horrible, but I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Violet Blue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have one slide, which I think kind of astounded the AV people. I don't have a presentation for you today. I want to talk to you about a couple of things. My name is Violet Blue, and you can check my ID when I leave the building. It is my name. As Chris prepped you, I am going to be talking about human sexuality and things of a frank sexual nature. I won't be describing anything sexually explicit. I will be using swear words, and I will be referencing some things that may need to be contextualized later if you have some young people with you. So since Gnomedex is for you, adjust your comfort levels. Feel free to leave at any time if you feel uncomfortable. So, I'm here to talk to you today because I have some problems I want to talk to you about. And not that my problems are everyone's problems, but I think these might resonate with you, and I wrote them down. The main thing I want to talk to you about today in my 20 minutes is that I've noticed in my over 10 years being in the online space, talking about human sexuality, we can't seem to make stable or sustainable social media models for ourselves. And it's really, really frustrating. And I think it's frustrating for a lot of us. Now, let me contextualize that by explaining to you how I got here. I am a writer, I am an author, I'm a blogger and a podcaster, but most of all, I'm a sex educator. I've been a sex educator since 1998. I have had over 80 class hours and hundreds of peer-to-peer counseling hours, volunteer training hours, hotline crisis counseling hours, from answering emails to being on a volunteer crisis hotline where I pick up the phone and answer anonymous sex help questions. And I've been doing this for 10 years. So I've been actively working the front lines of sex education at the same time that all of the authoring has been going on, all of the columning has going on, and all of the writing that I do actually is nonfiction. So it's about culture, it's about media, but it is about sex education. And the reason I was drawn to this, the passion that I had for this, came from the need to, seeing that there were a lot of problems happening because of the way that culture was talking about sex, the way that media was talking about sex was really, really problematic and becoming increasingly so. The more education that I did and the more that I learned about the way that people were living sex in their lives in real life, the media wasn't matching up to what people's lives were living. So during the Bush administration, when we had 8 years of abstinence education, I did an abstinence presentation at Google headquarters for one of my Google Tech Talks because we were in the middle of the Bush administration giving kids in the United States abstinence-only education, and on the crisis hotlines, we were getting calls like crazy from kids all over the United States who had no idea what was going on with their bodies, what they were doing, and we were watching STD rates spike, we were watching pregnancy rates spike, and in the talk that I gave at Google, I talked to them about the fact that that is where kids are going for sex education. So there was a powerful, powerful need for me. I had a vested interest to see this conversation changed. And the reason it's important for me to contextualize this as well is because this is the passion that brought me to technology. This is the passion that brought me to social media. I'm not an entrepreneur. I do not rely on tech, technology, or social media for my money or my business. I do not have a startup. I don't have anything to sell you, and I don't have any products to pitch you. All I have is passion. And the passion to change the cultural conversation about sex is what brought me to technology. People were talking about sex in one of two ways, I noticed, in the media. And when I started writing in 1998 and then really hit my stride around 2000 with a couple of columns, I was starting to do a lot of press interviews. We're talking everything from print magazines to CNN. And they either want you to talk about sex like it's a bad and scary thing, or that it doesn't exist at all. And that was kind of what gave me the aha moment. When emergent tech started happening, I immediately realized that the best thing that I could do for me was to change the conversation by changing the distribution routes of the information about sex and sexuality. So when emergent tech started happening, I had to get in it and put a sex-positive message out there. Let me contextualize what sex positive is. Sex positive is, now the school of sex education I come from is a very, very different school of sex ed than you'll find anywhere else in the United States. The schools I attended were in San Francisco, and they come from a sex positive perspective, which is different than the rest of the United States in that we survived the AIDS crisis in a way that the rest of the United States didn't. So we have infrastructures built in where we talk about sex in a completely different way. It's a harm reduction method. Sex positive is the idea that it is a descriptive way of talking about sex rather than a proscriptive way. We don't just talk about reproduction, we also talk about pleasure, but we don't tell anyone what's right or wrong about it. We simply give them the tools to help navigate what is best for them and their comfort levels around sexuality. The same goes with harm reduction. We apply harm reduction principles, and this is something that you'll want to think about because it's going to come back later in the talk. Harm reduction is something that we've taken from European approaches to drug culture. And basically what it is it's an idea that certain acts and certain things can be harmful. However, we can't mitigate the fact of whether they exist or not. So we are going to give people tools that are perfect for the individual and community specific. So there's no one blanket policy. It's a community-based approach to reduce the harm from harmful practices. So instead of saying just say no to sex, or if you have sex you're going to get AIDS and die, we simply give people the tools to understand what consent is, to understand what safer sex is, and to be able to take that and apply that to the value structure that they get from their families and their communities. It's very different from the rest of the United States. It's not an either-or conversation. So, seeing that this was completely lacking, and seeing that there were harmful effects in culture and in society, when things started really happening online and in media, I realized that this was the best way to circumvent the distribution channels that were locked down and that were preventing people like me from having a different message about sex and sexuality. So when RSS started happening, I had been hand coding my blog. Everyone was going to different blogging systems, and I was really concerned about giving what I wanted to say over to any gatekeepers. A lot of the people that I knew, a lot of the sex bloggers were going to Nerve. Remember those, Nerve blogs? And saying that I should go to those, and I was like, no, I don't want to hand this over, I want to keep it to myself. So I was contacted by a female Flash developer who came over to my house, wrote some scripts, and got me going. Later on, around 2005, I ended up in, it's a long story, but I ended up in a bet involving Adam Curry, and I ended up being the first female podcaster. And that was an exciting moment for me because I had always wanted to do radio and I'd always wanted to talk about sex and sexuality in a fun, exciting, titillating way, but not have it controlled by the FCC. So I started podcasting and it was very, very popular. So this started to change the conversation and the reaction was strong, very, very strong. My podcast at this point is over 8 million downloads, but the backlash was interesting. The backlash came from the structures that were in place. The podcast itself was really, really popular, but when it got pulled into iTunes, when iTunes first launched their podcast application, they brought everyone in They didn't even think about who they brought in. They kind of rushed the product out, and all of a sudden, I was #1 in the top 10. And I'm sure there were some interesting conversations about that, and then all of a sudden, all of the sex podcasts were gone. And because that happened, all of a sudden, my podcast was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And then it was in BBC News, and other outlets that were like, what happened here? And so, because of public scrutiny, they had to bring us all back in and contextualize that we were doing something that wasn't porn, it wasn't pornographic. And so what this did for me was, this was the beginning of highlighting the fragility of the types of media and the social media that we're trying to travel in the types of communication that we do. So, going on from there, another example of the fragility of trying to build these communities and having different types of conversations is, I don't know if anyone remembers TribeNet. TribeNet was one of the earlier, sort of social media, build a profile and hang out kind of places. And so I started a club there called the Smart Girls Porn Club, because I was realizing that there were an awful lot of women who just wanted to talk about pornography. And not in a way that was going to make them into sexual targets, but to just try and figure it out for ourselves and figure out what our relationship was to this and how we actually felt about it. Because we were so tired of people telling us what to think about it, and we were starting to have ideas and feelings and wanting to explore that. And so I started this club, and it had hundreds and hundreds of women in it. And then, surprise, surprise, there was a shift at TribeNet. They became conservative and decided to get rid of everything sex-related. And so this was my first experience with building community and having it taken away, or building community and having it shift. And this started to set a trend for me in which I realized that if you want to see where something is at its most fragile, or where someone is their most hypocritical, make the conversation about sex. Because outlets like TribeNet and other places that I've been since then, and other people have as well, they create a terms of service. It's, a terms of service. It's, you will not violate these terms, but it's always really loosely defined, and it's really loosely prescribed. And it's more of the, we either contextualize sex if it's bad, or we pretend that it's not going on at all. So we either get rid of it, we don't want to talk about it, or we just move it away. And this is something that is not only going to continue to make our social media structures fragile, but it's going to make us very vulnerable as a culture. So this also has something to do with what I'm seeing happening in social media. So I've been doing this for 10 years. I've spoken at pretty much all of the major conferences on the major stages about sex and sexuality and sex and technology. And it's a pretty awesome, normal conversation to have with a bunch of really bold, interesting individuals that attend these conferences and put these conferences on. And what I've been seeing happening is, at the same time that this trend toward hypocrisy and this trend toward fragility in building our social communities is apexing, is that we are also simultaneously swimming through a culture and an economy of bullshit in social media. Sick of it. Are we sick of it? And I'm sure you're seeing it happen. We see these wonderful, exciting structures built, and we rush them, and we go there, and we build community, and then something happens, and something shifts. They sell, or they turn their backs on their users, or they decide they want to become mainstream, not realizing that we are the mainstream too. And then all these people are moving into it and selling snake oil around it, and selling influence, and selling popularity contests, and selling the idea that you can get your brand forwarded if you name drop enough. Which, for me, that's an interesting shift in distribution models, and I can work with that. But I invite you all at some point to ask yourselves later if this is working for you. Because that is a great thing, and you want to talk about women in tech and women in tech media, that's great if you're the cheerleader. But most of the girls in tech weren't cheerleaders. So let's take this thought experiment a little bit further, right? So we have these social media sites. And, Facebook is a great example. It's Walmart for your communities. Like, seriously, is that what you want? I just had a page taken down there, a movement, another reiteration. Okay, so check this out, right? So I did the Smart Girls Porn Club on Tribe. It got yanked. And I was like, well, Jesus, there's hundreds of women that are interested in this, so fuck it, I'm gonna write a book about it. So I wrote this book called The Smart Girl's Guide to Porn, shopped it to, get one of my agents who was like, is that like Sex in the City? And I was like, fuck off. And and then I sold the book, and you can now read chapter 3 on Oprah Winfrey's website. So don't tell me this isn't the mainstream that we're talking about here. So the movement continues. I make this page on Facebook that is Our Porn Ourselves. It's like the Our Bodies Ourselves movement, the feminist movement of taking back the right to take a look at our bodies. We're taking back the right to look and talk about it. And anti-porn people and Christian conservatives flag it, and it gets taken down. We were increasing at 1,000 members a week. And again, it was just like, bam, within 3 weeks, we were gone. And it was like, okay, what happened to us? What happened to people like me, where I was running with packs of people who were with bold ideas, inventing these amazing things, being at the forefront, and now I'm handing my communities and my value over to gatekeepers? And these things are being built not by leaders, but by followers. So why are we doing this? So you go to ask, right? Like, why did you do this? How can I rectify this situation? I have, 3,500 women who are like, where did that community go? And here I am standing there holding the bag again, and all I get is terms of service, terms of service, terms of service. And I'm like, okay, so we don't want to talk about it again. And I think, okay, let's follow this thinking through to its end. What if, who's that guy? Who's that guy, right? Like, what if you're that guy with the terms of service, and you're like so afraid someone is going to talk about sex because like the world is going to explode. So you sit there and you're like, I've got my terms of service that my lawyers have created for me, and oh, there's some sex, flag, delete, flag, delete. Oh, they're complaining, oh, they're making noise. Well, terms of service. It's cut and copied from other sites. And then you're kind of looking at things and you like get really upset and you're like, this is really annoying. And then after a while, maybe kind of terms of service is a little bit of a fetish for you. You're like, oh God, this is getting kind of weird. So you change the channel, you're like, okay, fine, all this sex, all these people trying to put sex on my social websites and favoriting photos that I think are inappropriate, and I just need to get away from it, right? Because I think you kind of get a little crazy when you get a little so sex negative that you get so obsessed about it that you can't even talk about it. So you think, okay, I'm going to change the channel. I'm going to go to Chat Roulette because they took all the penises off there, and I know that's a safe, clean place for me to be. But then you go to Chat Roulette, and there's a furry masturbating with a tribble, and you're like, Jesus Christ. So you run out of your house, and you're like, fuck. And you grab your iPhone and you run out to your Prius and you get in your Prius and you plug your iPhone in, but you didn't know that was the day that 4chan launched an attack on the Apple App Store because they're really pissed off about Steve Jobs and porn and Phil Schiller saying that he's going to save the women and children of the world from pornography. And so your iPhone boots your car, roots it, and loads tentacle porn onto it, a virus into your Prius, and you're stuck and you're upset and your airbag starts to expand and you start crying and you're like, why did this happen to me? And then you're like, fuck, I got to get out of here. Fine, I'm going to run. I can't use the car. I can't call the EFF to save me because I can't use my phone. It's got pornography on it. What if it sends pornography to the EFF? And so you go to get out of your car, but you're stuck in bondage because your seatbelt has you in bondage, and you get halfway out the window and you're looking up at the sky, and right as you do that, Google Street View drives by and takes a picture of you, and you know they're going to blur your face, and that's going to look really dirty when they upload it, and you feel really filthy, and you're thinking, oh God, they're going to upload it, and somewhere is going to grab a screen cap of that, and they're going to fap to it, and what are Google's terms of service? Oh my God, I have to talk to someone else about their terms of service. Suddenly the tables are turned, and you're sitting there, and you're in seatbelt bondage, and you know someone's jerking off to you, and you're just like, oh God, I thought the social graph was going to save us all. I'm paying her later for that, actually. So what do? Right? Look at you. You are amazing. This is one of the most diverse crowds I've ever spoken to. It is awesome. It is so awesome. You're all makers. You're all artists. You're photographers. You're developers. You are entrepreneurs. You're different. You're all here because of a lot of different reasons. You're, like me, your passion, while not tech-related, is what brought you to technology. So you have the power to help change this, too. I think one of the things that could help is a harm reduction approach to social media. And it's not a just say no approach. It's applying different standards to different communities, letting the communities decide what their level is of what is harmful and what is not harmful, and giving people the tools to assess for themselves instead of letting gatekeepers decide for us what's okay for us to talk about, what's okay for us not to talk about, but a harm reduction approach. I think that could help. And if we could get people to build this idea into their systems, and please look harm reduction up. Please look it up online. And take out the rhetoric about drugs and apply sex, because in America, we are so puritanical that people are making us think about sexuality as a drug, and it's not accurate. It's not true. It is, and we as geeks, this is important to us. It is of the things that keep us connected to our bodies, our hearts, our minds, our passion, and our human sexuality. It's the intrinsic and beautiful part of our human circuitry. And they keep telling us it's not beautiful, and I'm going to keep telling you it is. So, with that, thank you.